Welcome back to Cycle Wisdom, where we empower women to restore natural menstrual cycles, to improve health, and promote fertility. I'm your host, Dr. Monica Minjeur, and I'm so glad you're listening today. Today, I'm going to be talking about the impact of stress on your overall health, but specifically in regards to your menstrual cycles and fertility. We'll start off with talking about the particular hormones that impact stress, as well as different stressors that you may encounter. I will also talk about the different ways that acute stress versus chronic stress can affect your body, your menstrual cycles, and your fertility. So let's start off as always with the story about a client of mine who we'll call Alyssa. Now, Alyssa had regular cycles that were happening every 28 to 30 days. She was lucky enough not to have any major symptoms. She was charting her cycles on a regular basis, and she was easily able to identify ovulation each cycle with an approximately equivalent luteal phase. Now, I often don't get to see all of these normal cycle charts because there's not anything from a medical standpoint that needs to be done. But Alyssa came to see me for her annual well check during the summertime. She brought her charting with me, and she had been concerned because towards the end of the year as a college student, when she was going through finals, she noticed that she had a cycle that was much farther apart than usual. When she normally had been having cycles every 28 to 30 days, she actually noticed a cycle that happened and then didn't have a menses again for another 47 days. Now, Alyssa was not sexually active, so there was no chance of pregnancy. And she identified during this time of charting that she had what looked to be two different peak days or two separate days of ovulation. She also had a period of some dry days in between those two peak days. And her initial thought was that she had actually ovulated twice that month. She came to me thinking maybe this would be how people have twins. And so we actually discussed what had happened was likely a stress event. So something that can happen we call a double peak. And what this means is that stress can actually delay ovulation event from occurring. So because Alyssa was in the midst of finals and a very stressful time, her body was getting ready to ovulate, and she had a significant stressful time leading up to that. And so her body actually delayed the release of that egg because of that stress. Amazingly enough, your body recognizes that stress is a good time to avoid pregnancy, and so can actually delay ovulation from happening altogether. So in Alyssa's case, I reassured her that this was a normal physiological response to stress, that all she needed to do was to just monitor her cycles going forward, and really nothing different that would need to be done. I did let her know that if this were to happen recurrently or more than 2 to 3 times per year, that we would want to look into this further to evaluate for any chronic stress that may be playing a role in this double peak that she was experiencing. So let's talk a little bit about some of the root cause of stress. And when I say stress, for most people, they're going to think more about that emotional or psychological stress, but this isn't the only thing that can cause stress. So what happens in our body when we have any of these types of stress, it will increase your cortisol levels. Now, this is a normal physiologic response that allows you to have a slight increase of your heart rate, increase of your blood pressure, gets the blood flowing to the organs that it needs to in order to deal with these acute stressors. Unfortunately, that cortisol increase will hijack many of the other hormones and put them into a more quiet mode. So, for example, your body will say, hey, I need to be able to be alert. I need to be able to run if there's some sort of danger. But I don't need to be able to digest as well. And ovulation doesn't need to happen because I am looking at just keeping things very, very normal from a rudimentary standpoint. And so different things can cause this stress response and thus the cortisol to be elevated. So when we think about emotional or psychological stress, I think a lot of people can identify that as perhaps a sense of overwhelm or fear or anxiety. Just kind of in general not feeling well from an emotional standpoint. However, there are lots of other things that could be seen as good stressors that will still increase your cortisol levels. And so if we think about different physical things that happen with your body, Things like illness or injury, those can also cause an increased stress response with increased cortisol levels seen. Other things that can cause physical stress would be in regards to your lifestyle choices. So in people who are getting excessive amounts of exercise, so working your body too much to the point of getting excessive cortisol input. Or perhaps you have sleep deprivation. So if you're not getting consistently that 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night that we often talk about, or if you have a poor diet. So diets that do not have a good basis in whole foods, if you're getting lots of processed foods, too much sugars in your diet, these things over time can cause increased cortisol levels, as well as causing that stress response that we see with the menstrual cycle irregularities. Other forms of stress can be situational, so things that may come up in your life, whether that's a job change, a death in the family, perhaps moving to a new location, or getting married. So even things that can be good things that happen in life can cause a stress response, increased cortisol, which then will impact downstream what we can see happen with your cycles. Now, I want you to think about stress kind of as two different types of stress, because they will have different impacts on your cycles as well as your overall health. So when we think about acute stressors, we want to think about their impact on your overall health and your cycle as something that is a temporary thing. So oftentimes this is going to include those things we talked about, like a job change, or in Alyssa's case, going through finals exams, or getting married, or an acute illness. Now, the good thing with these type of stress is that there's typically nothing long-term that we need to do. We generally will allow that period of time to pass and aim for stress reduction if possible. So oftentimes the things that we'll see from an acute stress as far as impacts on your health can include fatigue, depression, or even anxiety or panic attacks, depending upon how you're coping with things. What that looks like when it comes to your menstrual cycles is that we can see, like Alyssa had, what appears to be this double peak. Now, I want to be clear with a double peak. This does not mean that you are ovulating twice. Your body is designed and created to ovulate one time each cycle, but the hormones can start to lead up to look like an ovulation event is going to happen. And then if there's a stressor around that time or even prior to that time, your body will actually delay that ovulation event from happening, which can make it look like a second peak is happening. So when we teach women about watching for this double peak, we are always telling you, please be mindful if there has been any excessive stress or anything out of the ordinary. And if so, we teach you to watch for that double peak because it can and does happen. So we can see either this delayed ovulation with this double peak, or sometimes we can even see where a woman will not ovulate at all during a cycle. And this can show up looking like she was supposed to have a period, but just missed having the period altogether. So the way this looks different in your charting is that we generally don't see that ovulatory window. We don't see that fertile mucus or that temperature shift or that LH shift happen. And it can actually just show up as a missed period altogether. And so sometimes there are things we need to do to help your body get back to a point of cycling regularly, whether that's some lifestyle changes, whether that's some supplements, or sometimes a prescription medication to kind of help jumpstart things and get things moving back in the right direction again. So those are the things that acute stress can do. But let's talk about the impacts of chronic stress. Now, one of the screening questions that I always ask my new clients is to say, tell me about your stress level. And, many people will say, oh, well, I just live with chronic level of stress, but I manage it okay. And whether you feel as though you cope well with it, or whether you feel as though maybe I'm a hot mess when it comes to dealing with chronic stress, your body will tell the story. And so some of the things that we see that are a little different when we're looking with cases of chronic stress are that we'll still see oftentimes fatigue, depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. But oftentimes that chronic stress will manifest as even deeper health symptoms, like feeling lethargic. I just cannot get myself out of bed in the morning. I need an increased amount of sleep in order to be able to feel the same level and still am exhausted during the day. Some of our clients will say that they lose having their dreams altogether, and that is in a direct cortisol response because cortisol generally will correlate well with REM sleep. And so if we are having a chronic stress that's happening, over time, what happens is rather than your cortisol levels being elevated, your cortisol levels will actually start to decrease, and they can decrease too much. So one of the things that we often will screen for our patients is that we'll check a cortisol level first thing in the morning. That is oftentimes one of the times during the day that we should see those levels should elevate. If I see that your levels are not elevating or that they're on the very low end of normal, I have increased concern for chronic stress playing a role in your life, and we need to have a serious conversation about helping to restore your adrenal gland health, which is where cortisol is secreted from. Now, in women who are dealing with chronic stress, we can see a little bit different changes when it comes to your cycle. We certainly can see that double peak happen. More often that's happening with acute stress. But what we see oftentimes with chronic stress is that we'll see chronic anovulation. So what this is going to look like is prolonged cycles, or sometimes the period stops altogether. And really, when we start to see this chronic anovulation, it's your body's way of saying, hey, look, I am not well enough to be cycling regularly. I am not well enough to be pregnant at this time. Therefore, I'm going to just not do this ovulation thing. And that can be a really serious thing to try and come back from. Now, especially for women who are not in a menopausal state, depending upon your age and your other symptoms, if we see that you are not having cycles and your body probably should still be having cycles, that's where we'll talk a lot about working to heal as well as prevent that ongoing stress. So I want to talk briefly about some ways that you can work to heal your chronic stress, as well as ways to help prevent stress from impacting you long-term when it comes to your health, your menstrual cycles, and your fertility. Now, unfortunately, I have not yet found the magic switch to just turn off your stress levels. And if somebody finds it, please let me know, because that would be a much easier fix for so many of us. But really, when we talk about stress and working to help heal your body from chronic stress, the first and most important thing to do is to identify where those stress triggers are, and then work towards either eliminating those triggers, removing them, or changing situations where possible. Now, for some people, this can seem like an incredibly daunting task. I have worked with so many women who determine, hey, my stress trigger is my job, but I can't just quit my job. Can I? And for some of these women, they have found that is the only way that they're able to remove themselves from those stressful situations. I have had lots of clients who come to me saying, hey, we've dealt with infertility for 3 or 4 years, and I ended up changing nothing else in my life other than I quit my job. And within 3 months, I was pregnant without any additional intervention. So the role that stress plays on your body can be incredibly vast, and it can be really challenging to say, hey, I need to have a reality check about what's going on in my life, where I'm having major stressors, and where I can eliminate those stressors. Other stressors may be extended family, setting boundaries with them, dealing with some of the relationship drama that can happen, or maybe you're the person that always steps in to fix those situations. I would challenge you to say nothing is more important than your health. For so many women, we end up putting everybody else ahead of ourselves. We end up trying to help solve family situations and get ourselves into these situations long-term that do not serve us, that do not serve our health. So I am giving you permission today to unsubscribe from family drama, to set boundaries that honor your body, your health, and your stress, because this is not just about managing your menstrual cycles and your fertility. Chronic stress plays a long-term role on your overall health. And we know that people who are under chronic stress are at significantly increased risk of diabetes, heart disease, stroke, cancer, and early death. None of that is worth giving up your life for dealing with somebody else's drama and stress. Other things that can help on a more day-to-day basis can include deep breathing exercises, meditation, or gentle exercise. Now, as I had mentioned earlier on, we don't want to be doing excessive exercise, so I'm talking about going for a walk, stretching or yoga or Pilates or whatever your favorite thing is to just get the blood flow moving a little bit. We find that there are many good endorphins that get released when you can exercise, even just to be up and moving a little bit, or even if you're having problems with getting moving, just do some gentle stretching, and that can really make a big difference on your overall mood, which can then help with that stress reduction. Other things that can be beneficial are the power of counseling or therapy. And really here, what we're talking about is not just talk therapy where you just bare your soul and then walk away and think you feel better. We want to be having you work with somebody who is giving you tools to manage as well as to cope with the stressors. So ideally, my recommendation with clients is I tell them find a counselor who will give you a toolkit so that when you feel those stress levels starting to rise, you know, I can try this or this or this or this, and these things will hopefully help to improve and decrease your stress levels. Another thing that can be helpful is to prepare ahead of time when you know that you have upcoming commitments. So procrastination for a lot of people can be a part of what they feel makes them work better, or some people will tell me, oh, I work better under pressure. And for most people, that added stress can cause significant problems with your overall health, as well as your ability to focus on the task at hand. So if you know that you have deadlines with your job coming up, or you know that you have exams with school or life changes that are happening, please plan ahead. Plan for some downtime. Look forward to something that you can say, okay, I know that these 3 days are going to be crazy, but then on the 4th day, I'm going to completely take off from whatever it is that my tasks are I need to do and plan a day just to hang out with my friends or go for a spa day or make sure that I take an especially long walk that day. Finally, I'd like to leave with you, always consider going back to basics. Making sure that you get that sleep 7 to 8 hours per night, eating healthy foods, drinking plenty of water, exercising regularly, connecting with other people, and monitoring the other signs of your health can play such a huge role. For many of us, when stress hits, we go into panic mode and we forget these basics. It's amazing how much better people can feel when they are getting adequate sleep, when they are eating well and nourishing their bodies in a way that help promote overall health. Imagine if you had a better way to manage stress now that you know the role that it plays on your health and your menstrual cycles. It may seem impossible at times, but this way forward is possible with decreased impact of stress on your body. We can work together to identify and heal the impacts of stress on your body, to improve your health and promote fertility. If you're ready to work with our elite team of healthcare professionals, go to our website, radiantclinic.com, to schedule a free discovery call with me and learn more about our package-based pricing for comprehensive care. We are currently able to see people for in-person appointments in the Cedar Rapids, Iowa area, or can arrange for a telehealth visit if you live in the state of Iowa or Illinois. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please share this podcast with someone in your life who would benefit from our services. Remember to subscribe to this podcast for more empowering content that I look forward to sharing with you on our next episode of Cycle Wisdom.